The mean girl started bullying the black girl and making her sad. But she had a secret power they could only imagine in their wildest dreams. The air crackled with menace, a jagged electricity that seemed to hum beneath the velvet night, as the first scream tore through the stillness outside the sprawling Beverly Hills estate. It was sharp and desperate, a primal sound that sliced through the heavy quiet like a blade through silk, reverberating off the manicured hedges and the polished marble fountain that stood sentinel at the edge of the lawn. 4 girls stumbled backward, their designer heels, Louboutins and Mananolos, symbols of their untouchable status, catching on the dew-slick grass, sinking into the soft earth as if the ground itself sought to claim them. Their faces, once flawless and composed under layers of high-end makeup, were now twisted in terror, eyes wide and glassy, mouths open in silent pleas that the wind snatched away before they could take shape. Shadows loomed closer, hulking figures clad in black, their movements deliberate, predatory, their eyes glinting like wolves, circling prey beneath the fractured moonlight. The leader of the pack, Tiffany, clutched her bleeding lip, the crimson stark against her pale skin, her blonde hair a tangled mess that clung to her sweat-dampened cheeks as she shrieked for mercy. Her voice was a pitiful whine, high and broken, swallowed by the gusts that rustled the palm trees lining the estate's perimeter. Beside her, Chloe's mascara streaked down her face in twin rivers of black, her trembling hands clawing at the air as if she could grasp some invisible lifeline to pull her from the abyss she felt closing in. Sasha and Paige clung to each other, their once impeccable outfits, Chanel skirts and silk blouses, torn at the seams, their arrogance stripped away, replaced by a raw, animal fear that pulsed in their shallow breaths and darting eyes. Atop the marble steps of the mansion, the new girl Amara stood motionless, her silhouette framed by the golden glow of the chandelier spilling from the open doors behind her. Her dark eyes burned with something feral, something alive, a wildness that seemed to ripple through the night like a current. She didn't flinch as the henchmen closed in, their fists raised, knuckles gleaming faintly with the promise of violence, their breaths heavy with intent, fogging in the cool air. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture both delicate and menacing, her lips curling into a smile that was equal parts venomous and intoxicating, a smile that held the weight of a guillotine's blade. The night seemed to bend around her, the stars overhead dimming as if in deference, their cold light no match for the heat of her presence. Tiffany's pleas grew louder, a frantic sob spilling from her throat as she crawled forward, her manicured nails painted a signature shade of blush pink, digging into the damp earth, leaving little trails of desperation in her wake. Amara's voice cut through the chaos, low and sultry, a velvet-wrapped dagger that commanded the scene like a queen addressing her court. "Beg harder," she said, her words dripping with a cruel amusement. "Make it worth my time." The henchmen paused, their fists hovering mid-air, muscles taut, awaiting her next word as if she held their leashes in her elegant hands. The air thickened with the mingled scents of blood, expensive perfume notes of jasmine and oud, and the sour tang of betrayal, a heady cocktail that hung over the lawn like a storm cloud ready to burst. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath, suspended in the gravity of her gaze, time itself seeming to stretch and warp under the intensity of her will. The girls who had once ruled the halls of Westlake Academy with an iron fist and a Kai smile now groveled at her feet, their reign shattered in a single brutal night that would etch itself into the annals of their privileged world. Amara's fingers brushed the diamond necklace at her throat, a glittering cascade of stones that caught the moonlight and threw it back in sharp, defiant sparks. It was a gift, she'd once said offhandedly, from a grandmother they'd never known she had. A detail dropped like a pebble into the still waters of their curiosity, rippling outward with questions no one dared ask. Her laughter rang out then, sharp and crystalline, a sound that cut through the night like a shard of glass, promising no forgiveness, no reprieve. Tiffany's eyes widened as Amara stepped closer, her bare feet silent against the cold, polished stone of the steps, her presence a storm of elegance and wrath that seemed to pull the oxygen from the air. She knelt before the trembling girl, her silk robe pooling around her like spilled ink, her breath warm against Tiffany's tear-streaked face as she whispered something too soft for the wind to carry, something that drained the last vestiges of hope from Tiffany's body, leaving her slack with despair, a marionette with its strings severed. The henchmen resumed their work, fists meeting flesh in a symphony of violence, the dull thuds and sharp cries weaving a brutal counterpoint to the distant hum of traffic on Sunset Boulevard. Amara watched, her beauty a mask for the chaos she'd unleashed, her features serene yet unyielding, like a marble statue presiding over a battlefield. The night pulsed with her power, a dark rhythm that drowned out the whimpers below, and somewhere in the shadows a question lingered, heavy and unanswered. How had it come to this? The scene unfolded like a fever dream, raw and unrelenting. The girl's screams fading into broken whimpers as Amara turned away, her robe trailing behind her like a shadow stitched to her heels. She disappeared into the mansion, the heavy oak doors slamming shut with a finality that echoed through the hills, a sound that seemed to ripple outward, shaking the leaves of the eucalyptus trees and startling a lone owl into flight. Outside, the broken quartet was left to the mercy of her hired hands, their silhouettes blurring into the darkness as they delivered blow after blow, their movements mechanical, dispassionate. The stars above glittered coldly, different witnesses to a reckoning no one had seen coming. Not the students of Westlake Academy, with their whispered gossip and sidelong glances. Not the teacher, who turned blind eyes to the hierarchies that governed their classrooms. Not even the girls who now lay bruised and sobbing on the lawn, their designer bags strewn across the grass like fallen soldiers. The story of their downfall had begun weeks earlier, in a world of polished lockers and carefully curated secrets, where power was a currency traded in smirks and sharp words, and Amara was a stranger no one wanted to claim. It started on a Monday, the kind of crisp September morning that painted the Los Angeles sky in shades of gold and promise, the air carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus and exhaust as the city stirred awake. Westlake Academy buzzed with the hum of privilege, a symphony of clinking jewelry and the soft rustle of pleated skirts as girls moved through the courtyard, their laughter a melody of entitlement that bounced off the ivy-clad walls. Boys in tailored blazers leaned against pillars, their voices low and confident, their eyes tracking the ebb and flow of social currency with the precision of stockbrokers. The school was a microcosm of wealth and ambition, its sprawling campus a testament to the fortunes that fueled it, gleaming glass buildings, manicured lawns, and a library that housed first editions older than the city itself. Into this world stepped Amara, alone and unannounced, her head held high as she passed through the arched gates, her skin a rich mahogany that caught the sunlight in a way that made it seem to glow, a quiet defiance in every step. She wore no uniform, a bold departure from the crisp navy and white ensemble that marked the rest of the student body. Instead, she was clad in a simple black dress that clung to her frame, its cut modest yet striking, a stark contrast to the calculated flash of the girls around her. Their skirts hemmed just above regulation length, their blouses unbuttoned one button too far. Her hair fell in loose waves, a cascade of midnight that framed a face of sharp angles and quiet intensity, cheekbones high and unforgiving, lips full and set in a line that suggested neither warmth nor malice. Her eyes, those eyes were the true anomaly, deep and fathomless, holding a depth that unsettled anyone who lingered too long, as if they could see through the facades that Westlake's elite wore like armor. She carried a worn leather satchel, its edges frayed and stitched with uneven thread, a relic of a life no one knew and no one dared to ask about. She moved through the crowd like a ghost, her presence unnoticed until it demanded to be seen, her silence louder than the chatter that surrounded her. Tiffany saw her first. The undisputed queen bee of Westlake lounged against a marble pillar in the courtyard. Her blonde hair cascading over one shoulder in perfect waves, her lips painted a signature shade of rose that matched the blush on her cheeks. She was a vision of curated perfection, her posture relaxed yet regal, her green eyes scanning the scene with the lazy confidence of a monarch surveying her domain. She nudged Chloe, who stood beside her twirling a strand of chestnut hair around a manicured finger, her own beauty a softer echo of Tiffany's sharpness. "Look at that," Tiffany said, pointing with a nail polished to a glossy sheen, her voice dripping with disdain. "She looks like she crawled out of a thrift store." Chloe laughed, a sound like breaking glass, high and brittle, and leaned closer to Tiffany as if sharing a secret. "I bet she doesn't even know what a trust fund is," she replied, her hazel eyes glinting with mischief. Sasha joined them, her dark hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, her eyes narrowing as she adjusted her Prada sunglasses atop her head. "Someone needs to teach her her place," she said, her tone clipped and cold. "A general issuing orders." Paige, the quiet one, hovered at the edge of the group, her platinum curls bobbing as she nodded in agreement, her voice a murmur as she added, She doesn't belong here. The four of them, the sirens as the school had dubbed them, ruled Westlake with an iron grip. Their beauty a weapon honed to perfection, their cruelty a sport they played with relish. Amara was their next target, a fresh canvas for their malice, a newcomer who dared to walk their halls without bowing to their throne. The sirens had reigned over Westlake for years, their power built on a foundation of inherited wealth, sharp tongues, and an unspoken pact to protect their dominion at all costs. Tiffany, the daughter of a real estate mogul whose name adorned half the skyscrapers in downtown LA, wielded her charm like a blade, cutting down anyone who dared challenge her. Chloe, heiress to a fashion empire, used her wit and wardrobe to maintain her place at Tiffany's side, her laughter a signal flare for the group's next move. Sasha, whose father owned a private security firm, brought a calculating edge to their circle, her mind always 3 steps ahead, her loyalty fierce but conditional. Paige, the outlier, came from old money, oil fields and railroad stocks, and preferred to observe rather than engage, her silence a shield that hid a mind as ruthless as the rest. Together, they were untouchable, their influence seeping into every corner of the school, from the cafeteria cliques to the faculty lounge, where teachers traded favors to avoid their wrath. Amara's arrival was a crack in their perfect world, a ripple they couldn't ignore, and they set their sights on her with the precision of hunters stalking prey. The first move came at lunch, under the canopy of ancient oaks that shaded the outdoor tables, where the sirens held court like Renaissance queens. Damara sat alone at the edge of the quad, her satchel beside her. A sandwich unwrapped on the table, simple, unadorned, a stark contrast to the sushi platters and kale salads the others flaunted. Tiffany sauntered over, her heels clicking against the stone path, the others trailing behind like a royal entourage. "Lost, are we?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet, her smile a razor's edge. Amara looked up, her expression unreadable, and said nothing, her silence a wall that Tiffany couldn't breach. Chloe smirked, tossing her hair. "Maybe she doesn't speak English," she quipped, earning a chorus of giggles from Sasha and Paige. Sasha leaned in, her sunglasses sliding down her nose. "This isn't a charity school, you know," she said, her tone icy. "You're in over your head." Paige stayed silent, her blue eyes fixed on Amara, a flicker of curiosity breaking through her usual reserve. Amara met their gazes one by one, her eyes steady, unflinching, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low and calm, carrying a weight that silenced their laughter. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said, and turned back to her sandwich, dismissing them as if they were nothing. The sirens retreated, their smiles faltering, their whispers sharp with irritation. They'd expected tears, a stammered apology, a crack in her composure. Anything but the quiet defiance that radiated from her like heat from a flame. That moment marked the beginning of their campaign. A war waged in seed-long glances and barbed comments, in rumors that spread like wildfire through the halls. They called her a scholarship kid, a nobody, a girl who'd stumbled into their world by mistake. They mocked her clothes, her satchel, her solitude, painting her as an outsider unworthy of their gilded circle. But Amara didn't bend. She walked the halls with the same steady grace, her head high, her silence a shield that deflected their venom. She sat alone, studied alone, existed alone, and yet her presence grew, a shadow that crept into their thoughts, their conversations, their nightmares. Weeks passed, and the sirens' attacks escalated. They tripped her in the hallway, spilling her books across the polished floor, only to watch her gather them with a calm that unnerved them. They hacked her locker, filling it with trash, crumpled notes, food wrappers, a dead rose, only to find it empty the next day, as if she'd anticipated their move. They spread stories of a sordid past, a broken home, a mother who'd abandoned her. But Amara offered no rebuttal, no defense, her silence fueling their frustration. The more they pushed, the more she seemed to rise, her stillness a mirror that reflected their own insecurities back at them. Students began to whisper, not about her but about them, about the cracks in their armor, the desperation in their cruelty. The siren's throne trembled, and they didn't know why. Then came the party. The annual Westlake Gala, hosted at Tiffany's Beverly Hills estate, a sprawling monument to excess with its infinity pool and glass-walled ballroom. It was the event of the season, a night where alliances were forged and enemies humiliated, where the sirens shone brightest. They hadn't invited Amara, of course, but she arrived anyway, slipping through the gates in a crimson dress that flowed like blood against her skin, her necklace glinting like a star at her throat. The crowd parted as she entered, her presence a quiet thunder that drowned out the music, her eyes locking with Tiffany's across the room. The sirens froze, their smiles brittle, their power challenged in a way they couldn't name. Amara didn't speak, didn't dance, didn't mingle. She simply watched, her gaze a weight they couldn't shake. What happened next was a blur of rage and miscalculation. Tiffany cornered her near the pool, words dripping with venom, the others circling like sharks. "You think you can waltz in here and take what's ours?" she hissed, her voice trembling with fury. Amara smiled. That same venomous, intoxicating smile, and said, "I don't take, I claim." The slap came fast, Tiffany's hand cracking across Amara's cheek, but Amara didn't flinch, didn't blink, her smile widening as a thin trickle of blood ran from her lip. The crowd gasped, the air shifting, and then the henchmen appeared, silent, hulking figures in black, summoned by a signal no one saw. The sirens laughed at first, thinking it a bluff, but the laughter died as the men advanced, their intent clear. Amara stepped back, her voice a whisper that carried over the chaos. "You wanted my attention. Now you have it." The night spiraled into the violence that now stained the lawn, the sirens' empire crumbling under Amara's wrath. She'd planned it all, the humiliation, the reckoning, the fall, her silence a mask for a mind that had mapped their destruction from the moment she'd walked through Westlake's gates. The diamond necklace, the grandmother's gift, was a clue they'd overlooked, a thread to a past they couldn't fathom, a lineage of power that dwarfed their own. As the mansion doors closed behind her, the sirens broken at her feet, the question lingered still: who was Amara, and what did she want? The stars offered no answers, and the night kept her secrets, a dark tapestry woven with blood and ambition. The bullying began subtly, a brush of venom cloaked in sweetness. Tiffany tripped Amara in the hallway, her heel catching the edge of Amara's dress as she purred an insincere apology. Chloe spilled coffee on Amara's satchel during lunch, giggling as she said it was an accident. Sasha whispered rumors. Amara was a foster kid, a charity case, a nobody, letting the word spread like wildfire through the cafeteria. Paige left notes in Amara's locker, scrawled in pink ink, "Go back where you came from." Amara said nothing, her silence a wall they couldn't breach, her eyes flickering with something they couldn't name. She ate alone, sat alone, walked alone, an orphan in a sea of wealth, her past a mystery they mocked, but never questioned. They didn't know her grandmother had died 3 weeks earlier, leaving her a fortune that dwarfed their own. They didn't know Amara was no longer the girl they assumed her to be. The shift came on a Friday, when the news broke like a storm across the school. A teacher mentioned it in passing during English class. Amara Jackson, the quiet girl in the back row, had inherited billions. Evelyn Jackson, the reclusive billionaire who'd built an empire in tech and real estate. The room went still, pencils hovering over notebooks, eyes darting to Amara's seat. She didn't look up from her book, her fingers tracing the pages as if the world hadn't just tilted beneath her. Tiffany overheard it first, her jaw tightening as she leaned toward Chloe and hissed that it couldn't be true. Chloe's eyes widened, her voice a whisper as she said they needed to find out. Sasha smirked, suggesting they could use a friend with that kind of money. Paige nodded, her quiet agreement sealing their new plan. The sirens turned their venom into honey overnight, their cruelty replaced by a cloying desperation to win Amara's favor. They approached her at lunch, their smiles radiant, their voices syrupy. Tiffany sat beside Amara, uninvited, her perfume overwhelming as she said they'd gotten off on the wrong foot. Chloe offered to buy Amara a new bag, her tone insistent as she promised it'd be designer. Sasha complimented Amara's dress, her words a lie wrapped in flattery, and Paige slid a latte across the table, murmuring that they should hang out sometime. Amara looked at them, her gaze cutting through their facade, and said nothing. She stood, leaving the latte untouched, and walked away, her silence louder than their pleas. The sirens exchanged glances, their smiles faltering, their plan unraveling before it began. They didn't know Amara had already seen through them, her memory a ledger of every slight, every insult. She wasn't here to forgive. She was here to destroy. That night, Amara sat in her grandmother's mansion, the walls lined with art worth millions, the air heavy with the scent of jasmine and old money. She ran her fingers over a mahogany desk, her grandmother's will spread before her, pages of legal jargon that made her the sole heir to an empire. Evelyn had been a woman of steel, a black titan who'd clawed her way from nothing to everything, and she'd raised Amara in secret, away from the world's prying eyes. Now at 18, Amara was alone, her grief a quiet fire that fueled her every move. She picked up the phone, her voice smooth as silk as she told a man named Victor to find her some muscle discreet, loyal and unafraid of blood. Victor laughed, a low rumble, and said, "It'd be done by morning." Amara hung up, her reflection in the window a portrait of resolve, her beauty sharpened by the promise of vengeance. The sirens didn't see it coming. They cornered Amara, after school on Monday, their desperation turning aggressive. Tiffany grabbed Amara's arm, her nails digging in as she demanded to know why Amara was ignoring them. Chloe sneered, calling her an ungrateful bitch who didn't deserve her money. Sasha shoved Amara against a locker, her voice a hiss as she said they'd make her regret it. Paige watched, her silence complicit, her eyes darting nervously. Amara smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips, and said they'd see who regretted what. She pulled free, her touch lingering on Tiffany's wrist, a promise, a threat, and walked away, her hips swaying with a confidence that left them rattled. The retaliation began that night. Amara stood in the shadows of a parking lot, Victor at her side, his bulk a wall of menace. 5 men stepped forward, their faces obscured, their fists wrapped in tape. She pointed at a photo of the sirens, her voice a purr as she told Victor to make it hurt, but not too much. Not yet. The men nodded, disappearing into the night, and Amara watched, her pulse quickening with something dark and delicious. The first attack came at Chloe's house, her screams echoing through the manicured streets as the henchmen dragged her from her car, their blows precise, their message clear. Sasha was next, cornered in an alley after a party, her sunglasses shattering under a fist. Paige tried to run, her heels abandoned on a sidewalk as they caught her, her pleas ignored. Tiffany fought back, her nails raking flesh, but she fell too, her crown of blonde hair stained with blood. By the time they faced Amara on the lawn of her mansion, the sirens were broken, their beauty marred, their power stripped. She orchestrated the final act with a lover's care, her henchmen a chorus to her wrath. Tiffany begged, her voice raw, as she said she was sorry, her body trembling. Chloe sobbed, promising anything. Money, loyalty, silence. Sasha cursed, her defiance fading as a fist hovered near her face. Paige whispered for mercy, her eyes pleading. Amara listened, her head tilted, her fingers brushing the diamond at her throat. And then she laughed, a sound that was both seduction and ruin. She told them they'd never touch her again, her words a blade, and signaled the men to finish it.